actually recording, but just give me some chat. Tell me about the cheetahs or something, just while I check this.
Cheetahs are really cool animals, and they've got lots of spots. On average, cheetahs have about 2,000 spots on their body.
Are you serious?
And if you shave their skin off, they still have spots on their skin.
Really? Huh.
Well, I mean, that wasn't even supposed to be part of the podcast, but I think I might open with that.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Byron Pace, and this is a Modern Huntsman production. I'm recording this intro from the outskirts of Johannesburg, just prior to getting on a plane to Windhoek to work on a new project all about rhino tracking and rhino conservation. So if you can hear planes and helicopters and birds in the background, that is why. A quick update on the last couple of weeks. Apologies for the sporadic podcast going out, but there has been a very good reason for that. In that I have done, I think now, 20 interviews as part of a new series for this podcast called Uplands. I think I'm going to call the series Uplands. And it's looking at the future of the uplands in the UK. There's a lot of things that apply to aspects of land management happening in other parts of the world as well, but my focus is specifically in the UK, where I live for most of the time. And I've been busy with it. We've interviewed a large number of people, from practitioners on the ground to some of the leading scientists in the world when it comes to fire management and peatland and carbon sequestration. It's a really highly produced podcast, a lot like the Mozambique series we did, From the Field, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about now. So that's what's been taking up my time in the last couple of weeks. And those kind of shows, which involve a lot of people and a lot of investigative journalism, just to take up a lot of time. So forgive me for this being a little late, but I know what I have lined up for the next couple of weeks, and it's going to start with this podcast. Now, if you cast your mind back to episode 200, and then every second show after that, for 3 shows, we did a series called From the Field. It was recorded in Mozambique. I was there with Tyler Sharp, editor-in-chief of Modern Huntsman, and we were there documenting the work going on at Zambezi Delta Safaris with the Cabela Family Foundation. Ivan Carter was there. We were working with the guys from the Conservation Film Company as well. And it was this incredible story about reintroducing cheetah to their former range within the area that is managed by Mark Haldane and the team at Zambezi Delta Safaris. So I produced a 3-part series, which if you haven't listened to that, I'd encourage you to go back to episode 200 and find those and listen to them. They're one of my favorite series that I've ever produced, and it's exactly the kind of podcast and the kind of work that I love to do. So this Upland series that I was telling you about is going to be much more like that. There is also some behind-the-scenes shorts, if you haven't seen those, which go along with the Mozambique From the Field series, which you can see on the Modern Huntsman Instagram in the Reels. You can also visit my website, byronpace.com. Look at film shorts, they're all there as well. And of course, we covered the story in Volume 8, the African volume for Modern Huntsman, which you can still buy on the Modern Huntsman website, modernhuntsman.com. There was a big spread in there. We talked about a lot of the work that we were doing and documenting in Mozambique in that volume. But in the process of putting that series together, I had to cut out large chunks of the interviews that we did with all the people who were in that series. And so I thought, why not share these full-length conversations with you, because you've missed out on so much great conversation. So I'm starting that today. You're going to hear from Willem Briers-Louw. He is a conservation biologist at Zambezi Delta Safaris. You're going to hear everything from the 24 Lions project to the actual what it takes to go and dart and collar lions, his background, his history, how he got into the amazing job that he's doing now, and some of his views around conservation in Africa and how that's going to function, and how he sees safeguarding large landscapes and large carnivores and facilitating landscape conservation across the continent. I'm joined in this episode by Tyler Sharp. We were sitting outside the cheetah enclosures where these newly reintroduced cheetahs were being held for a period of time before being released into the wilderness around there. I mean, this is now more than 18 months ago. So if you want to get some updates on how they're doing, just also head over to the Zambezi Delta Safari's Instagram, and you'll see lots of updates and videos and pictures that will tell you how those cheetahs have been doing, and they've reintroduced more since, and it's been an incredible success story by all accounts. But I have another update of what's coming in the next couple of months. Along with the Upland series, I have a new 4-part series called From the Front Lines, which is being supported by Rocky Talkie Radios. The first 2 episodes are going to be coming to you from Africa. I'm going to be recording them this month into next month, so hopefully they should be released. The first episode should be released sometime in June. I'm going to be speaking to conservationists fighting the daily fight for nature from the front lines. I'm currently here working on different film projects for a couple of months, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to not only use the radios in action, but also speak to some brilliant people. I actually end up using radios all the time in film productions because often there's somebody who's a long way away that you're trying to ask to do something, walk over a ridge, over a mountaintop, and you can't always shout. So I'm going to be using these radios for the first time in anger over the next 2 months. They're incredibly compact little radios, and if you want to read the full specs, you can check out their website, Rocky Talkie Radios. There's a link in the description. In brief, USB-C charged, will operate down to -20, 5-mile range, up to a 5-mile range in the mountains, up to 25 miles line of sight. Most importantly for me is their size and weight, because I'm always carrying a lot of gear, and they're tiny, and they can fit into the little pouch that I use to carry lenses with. They've kindly offered all my podcast listeners 10% off. So if you head over to rockytalkie.com/into the wilderness, it'll take you to a page where you can order what you want and you will get 10% off. I think it's a pretty good deal. I'll be bringing you more from the field in the coming weeks, but for now, go and check out Rocky Talkie Radios. And the last thing that I have to say before we dive into this brilliant episode with Willem is to say thank you to all of my Patreon supporters who absolutely make it possible to do these more highly integrated podcasts from the field. And this week, they include Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of RD Contracting, James Marchington, the guys at South Esher Stalking, Dick Ekstrom, Mark Zabrowski, and Leslie Cumming. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you to every other Patreon supporter who is not necessarily a top tier, so it doesn't get a name shout out at the front, but every single one of you is massively important to allow me to keep doing what I'm doing. And actually, I was on my Patreon page a couple of days ago. I'm quite bad at updating that because I know that all of these podcasts go to your podcast feed, and so you're notified. And often if I'm on the road and I'm filming and I'm traveling, then it takes me a little while to update the actual podcast on the Patreon account. I'm assuming that's not where everybody is listening to these anyway. But I've changed the Patreon page to not only be supporting of the podcast, but actually all of the other work that I do, because often it is the case that the film projects that I think are the most important film projects that I want to do are very difficult to find funding for. Paid in Blood, which you've heard me talk about on this podcast, is a great example of that. Getting the last funding in place for post-production has been a real nightmare. I've had some incredible support from some people, but getting industry support around projects like that can be a challenge. And so I've changed the Patreon to not only be supporting the podcast, but also the films and writing that I do as well. And I'm going to try and be a bit better at sharing things on that platform. But if you really want to see the day-to-day of what is going on, follow me on Instagram. And also I don't send a lot of newsletters out, but I'm going to be slightly better at doing that as well. Head over to byronpace.com and you can subscribe to any updates, and most of my most recent work is on there as well. Enjoy the show. Willem, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast, coming to you from Mozambique, which we have for the last couple of podcasts we've recorded. But the last 24 hours plus have probably been one of the most exciting days of my life. Right now we are recording with 2 big male cheetahs kind of eyeballing us through the cruiser that we're hiding behind for the wind out in the bush here. And last night we were catching leopards out of trees. I think I want your job.
You're welcome to have it.
I don't think you're going to hand it over so easily. Tell me, I mean, that's a taster of what this man does on a day-to-day basis. Take me right back. Actually, I'd like to understand how you ended up getting here in the first place, your kind of career progression and what you studied to be able to do this. Because this sounds like a fairy tale.
No, it is, definitely is. Very much a privilege to be working out in the bush with some incredible people, incredible animals as well. So from my background, I started off with a bachelor's degree in conservation ecology, which was done in South Africa. And with that, I started to develop quite a passion for carnivore research. And that led me to doing some research with leopards. I followed my bachelor's degree up with a master's in a southern African country called Malawi, and that was focused on the reintroduction of two top carnivore species, so the leopard and lion, and that kind of shaped where I was going with my career path. So I really found carnivores super exciting. There's never a dull moment with them. And after I finished my master's degree, I followed up with my first official job, which was in Namibia, north of Windhoek, about 3 hours, in a place called Otjiwarongo. And
I know it well.
There I did some research with cheetahs, leopards as well, and that was, kind of almost validating what I studied and applying the research in a conservation context, which is on a broader scale. And that was where I was about 2.5 years ago, and suddenly a position popped up in Mozambique, and it was focused on a lion reintroduction project. The project's name was 24 Lions, and it was a new project, and a project in an area where there's basically been no research before, which to me is very appealing. I love the idea of coming to an area and knowing that there's basically nothing known about the area. So it kind of gives you the opportunity to have a bit of freedom and to really follow what you want to do. And I was given the opportunity to join the team here at Zambezi Delta Conservation, with some incredible partners, the Kabela Family Foundation being the core donor. And it's really been a roller coaster ride so far. It's 2.5 years in, and I'm still loving it.
What an incredible opportunity. I actually didn't know that this was your first job here. And obviously this is our first time to visit, and I've met Mark several years ago. But I didn't know that you were actually joined on from the beginning of this project. And I can only imagine how exciting it is to see, something like yesterday where we actually collared the second generation of lion, the first lion cubs born here. I mean, what kind of moment was that like for you?
It's awesome because with the lion reintroduction, the kind of measure of the success of the reintroduction is by having the next generation following the founder population to breed. And so we're at the point now where the first generation is actually reaching adulthood, and that, as you say, I mean, that gave us the opportunity to collar one of those individuals yesterday. And with that, we really get to understand how this population is starting to expand within the ecosystem. And it's exciting stuff.
Talk us through that process, like we were doing today, and Tyler did with you a couple of days ago. Explain to people what collaring lions here is like, because it's an amazing feat of aviation. I mean, we had 3 helicopters in the sky today. You're tracking somebody with a dog. Like, explain that whole thing from getting up in the morning and saying, "Today we're collaring lions."
It's quite difficult to explain, but
we'll augment it with pictures.
That will be quite helpful, I think. So, firstly, to explain the ecosystem, I think is probably the most important.
See, this
thing.
is the scientist in him coming out. It's like you've jumped to the cool shit. Let's go back. We need to create ecosystems first for lions to exist in. You're right, Willem. Let's talk about ecosystems.
Yeah.
So the Zambezi Delta ecosystem, the name says it. So it's a delta ecosystem. So it largely consists of a floodplain. The floodplain is basically grassland that is inundated with water for 6 to 8 months of the year.
It's huge.
We
saw it today.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the entire ecosystem it covers just under 1 million hectares, which is incredibly large in size. And the road network within the concessions within the area are fairly limited because of the fact that there's a large portion that's floodplain that you just cannot drive with a vehicle, which in other areas you're able to do. And so you're able to drive a road, dart the animal next to the vehicle, collar the line, fairly simple. So out here, we don't have that luxury. we have to use helicopters to firstly track our lines and then also to collar them. And so we're very fortunate to have a few helicopters which we can use for tracking. We've got a Robinson 22, which is a small little thing. We call it the dung beetle.
Well, because of how it moves around in the wind.
I don't know if I'm allowed.
You can.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on on this channel, but it's kind of an inside joke. It's a dung beetle because you got to know your shit to fly it.
I can see that
because in the wind that thing it becomes a little bit like a rag doll if you don't know it too well. But so we've got a small helicopter that we use for actually tracking the lions. And then we've got a few bigger helicopters that we use to dart. And so with the darting, it can be a smooth operation, but it can also be challenging. This afternoon we tried to dart one of these lions, and she was just giving us sticks. She was sticking to a forest area. You try and move her around, try and work her with the helicopter to try and get her in a place that you can dart her. And sometimes they just don't respond to the helicopter. So even with the helicopters, you have challenges. But if I can put it in a general context of how we go about actually darting the line is, if the line has a GPS collar on it already, we can actually have a GPS position, a waypoint, and we can fly to that position, and we locate the individual that we need to dart to recollar or to put a new collar on. And with that, generally speaking, you've got one helicopter that's flying, that's searching for the line, and that will do the darting. And you usually, this is a little bit more on the technical side, is you usually want to have the line in a bit of a run so that you can dart it from the backside.
I noticed that today. Yeah.
Yeah. So and it's not easy. The lines are often running at full speed. The helicopter is following. Firstly, the pilot has to know his how to do it.
He needs his shit. He needs to know his shit.
Exactly. So exactly.
I mean, the pilots you have here are just some of the most insanely good pilots.
Exactly.
The most insanely good pilots I've ever flown with.
Yeah. So I must say, one of them does have roughly about 10,000 hours of flying time, which is quite a major milestone.
Is that
for Peter
Yeah.
Pilstein? Yeah.
I believe that qualifies you as a master.
Yes.
In I forget who said that it takes 10,000 hours to.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, for any. Wow.
And also, when it comes to game work, it's almost less about, particularly in the game capture, game darting industry, it's a lot more about knowing the animals, and being a good pilot, it kind of comes with time, but knowing the animals is probably the most important thing.
Because you've got to be able to read them. Yeah.
Exactly. So if
he knows like lions moving this direction, it's probably going to cut like that. Because you've got somebody out the back of the helicopter, the vet.
Exactly.
With his finger on the trigger, waiting for that tiny, tiny, tiny window to be able to put a dart in the back end of a lion.
Exactly. And so fortunately we've got a few pilots that are really experienced, and I'm going to name drop as well.
Go for it.
We've got an incredible vet that is based in Maputo in Mozambique. His name is Dr. João Almeida, and he's done most of our darting and collaring of lions, elephants, and a bunch of other species as well. And he's just, really confident. So he's the guy that sits behind the pilot, and he's darting out of the helicopter as the pilot's getting closer to that cat.
Now there's a dude who's enthused by his job. I was watching him today in the helicopter and I was like, you love every second of this. Like,
No, he does.
you could see him savoring it.
Yeah. And yeah, Joao's got a lot of Portuguese swagger for sure.
Oh, of course. You can't be in Mozambique without it.
Yeah.
I almost feel like he probably would have been like a high-end footballer if he wasn't doing this.
Yeah. I asked him if he liked football. He goes, I would not be Portuguese if I did not.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And then from that point, the dart goes off, it's a successful hit. What's next?
Well, if it's a successful hit, you are pretty happy at that moment. Often the dart does end up missing the line.
But to be fair, in the 4 collarings that have happened, 5 collarings in the last 3 days, he's hit every single one.
Exactly.
He has not missed since we've been
he
here.
did miss one today.
One
but
miss.
we won't
He
talk about
did miss.
that.
Oh, we won't.
But you've also darted an elephant. I mean, an elephant's pretty big, but
Yeah.
still, I mean,
Yeah.
it's still difficult.
Yeah. No,
But an elephant as well.
because you're moving in a moving
Yeah.
object.
I
or
know
you're
trying
in a
to film
helicopter.
from one of those bloody things. It's like, it's almost impossible. It's vibrating and swishing and...
No, it's very challenging. But so let's take the example of you've darted the animal. So the animal's been darted. It looks like a good dart. The dart's gone in the rump, in the leg somewhere, which means it's in the muscle. The drug inside the dart, it's a specific combination of drugs with a specific dosage. The dosage varies based on whether it's an adult, a youngster, a male or a female, and it's kind of more on the size of the animal. And so the dosage and the combination of drugs will take roughly, the one that Dr. João uses, it will take roughly around 6 to 8 minutes for the animal to fully be sedated. And so as you witnessed with the lion collarings, is what you end up doing is you would like that animal not to go and hide in a bush, because if that animal's not fully asleep, you have to walk in there and confront that animal on foot, which is not the safest thing to do. So ideally, what you would like to do, what the pilot's job is to try and circle around the lion and try and position the lion in a place where it's fairly open and it's minimal risk to the people on the ground walking in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And this is why today it was really thick grass. I mean, some of it was like as high as our heads. You went in with some safety.
Yes, we did. A backup.
Backup,
So we do take rifles with if we
because
go
it can go wrong. I mean, we're kind of joking around here, but like
Exactly.
this is actually I'm amazed how relaxed everybody is, and I guess that's just a sign of the professionalism and skill and the fact that you guys have done it a lot of times. But there's a lot of things that can go wrong.
No, exactly. And I think the most important thing, what's worse than fear is complacency. If you get used to the setup, and every time you dart a line you think that line's down, if you're not paying attention to that animal, things can go wrong, and that's when the rifles are used. But if you're paying attention and you're watching the animal's behavior, so for example, if the lion is 50 yards away, 50 meters away, and you can see the animal, you wait first, you give it a second, you don't walk directly up to the animal. If you have a stick or something to throw at the animal, you try and hit it on the rump, not in the face. That would be quite, not too great. But you try and hit it on the leg just to see if it reacts to that. Because with the drug combination that Dr. João uses, the animal's still quite sensitive to stimulus. So whether it's sound, visual stimulus, so lights in the eyes, some kind of noise that causes them to wake up for a few seconds, and during that period it's a dangerous period.
You only need a few seconds with a lion or a leopard.
Exactly.
Things go wrong.
Split seconds.
And then lying on the ground, we're in like we were today. What's the next procedure? I mean, maybe you can explain. I mean, it's clearly the way you've described it. It's a lot of work. It's a big investment, both in time and resources. Why go to all this effort for the collaring?
It's a good question because it's flying choppers around is not cheap. Secondly, the collars that we're purchasing are also not cheap. And then following on that is you've got the tracking of the animals, which is also as I said in the dung beetle, which is also you need funding to be able to have that helicopter in the air to be able to track the lions. So all of this it's not cheap, and I guess the question is why do it? Why do you actually? What is the purpose of collaring the lions? Why can't we just let them go?
Yeah.
And so,
especially when they're doing so well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we only know they're doing well because we've collared them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always that saying of knowledge is power. And I think with the more you know, the more you can react, the more you can conserve, the more you can manage. And so by collaring these lions, we can see exactly where their home ranges are. We know exactly which prides are moving where, how they're interacting with each other, whether there's mating going on, whether there's reproductive events going on. For example, if a female lioness is showing a star-shaped pattern, we know that lioness has got cubs. We can follow up, make sure that the cubs are fine. We've had, we could even follow a few events of infanticide, which is when another male lion comes in and kills the cubs of a female because it's not his. And that's
So you've seen that happen here. I know that it happens, but you've actually been able to log that.
We haven't witnessed it, but based on the collars, we know that it happened because one of the females was showing star-shaped pattern, and another male came in straight into where that female was with the cub. We witnessed that cub that day. That night he came in, and the day after the female started moving in long stretches and in a continuous pattern, not in a star-shaped pattern anymore.
Cub gone.
Cub gone.
Amazing. And the incredible thing is you're able to tell this with some pings of data being
Exactly.
uploaded to the sky.
Yeah, and following up as well.
Yeah.
So I think we from our side we just keep praising the Cabela Family Foundation for funding the collars as well as the tracking, because without that, with such a vast landscape, it's, as I said, it's about 1 million hectares. Which I think, if my conversion is correct, I think it's just over 2 million acres.
Yeah, it's about double, I think, per acres. Yeah.
And it's a massive area. There's no fences, which makes this place really incredible. Most places or a lot of places in Southern Africa are fenced because that prevents the animals from moving out, but it takes away the wildness and it takes away the fact that the animals can move out of the area and kind of utilize a broader area than being restricted to a specific area, with the fencing. So we don't know if these lions are going to move out of the area. They probably will at some stage, but we'll only know if we have collars on them. And at the end of the day, we don't really want to put a collar on every individual. There's a lot of beauty in seeing an uncollared lion in an open landscape. It's something really special. We've been able to witness that now with the second generation of cubs being born, and some have reached adulthood already, and they're starting to disperse, and so that's really incredible to see. But our kind of main goal is to make sure that we have the prides, which are made up of the females and their cubs, their offspring, is to have those as many of the prides as possible monitored so that we can see how they expand, how they split off, how they come together, and that then helps us provide that provides us with the data, and we can use that data to inform management of how we actually conserve the species going forward into the future. Because it's cool to bring in lions, but the long-term monitoring is actually what will make sure that we can make management decisions. So, for example, offtake of lions, if it comes to that, that's one aspect that
Why might that be something that needs to be done?
So,
like the offtake of lions.
so because the area it's a hunting area. So there's 4 concessions within the Zambezi Delta complex. So each concession is roughly between 1,000 and 2,500 square kilometers. And there's also Marumara National Reserve, which is pretty much a swamp habitat. It's not a typical reserve that one pictures in your mind. It's fully inundated with water for 90% of the year.
Wow.
And what people tend to think is that, there's always the controversial trophy hunting debate. But if you take this landscape, there would literally not be a single animal left if it wasn't for hunting. And hunting has actually saved this area, because what it's done is it's brought foreign clients in at a critical time just after the Mozambican Civil War, which lasted for about 2 decades. That, in combination with rampant poaching, led to a decline of epic proportions in this place. 95% of wildlife populations declined, including elephants, buffalo, hippo, all the big stuff. No one really knows about the small stuff because no one was monitoring that. But with the hunting taking over, or at least starting up again, it's actually led to one of the most incredible recoveries of wildlife in Africa, in the world. We've seen numbers increase by over 3,000%. We've had
3,000%.
That's incredible.
For example, buffalo, they used to occur in about a population of about 45,000 in the entire complex. The numbers
across all the concessions.
So that's the entire landscape.
Yeah.
Then the numbers dropped to about 2,500, actually under 2,500 individuals from 45,000, and we're now at, the last count was about 22,000. So
it's getting right back up there again.
Exactly, and it's all because it's been provided the protection that it needs. So with the protection, it's able to, in a way, sustain itself because it's such a productive system. It's grassland. There's tons of water, tons of food, and one of the key components to bringing in, or one of the reasons for bringing in the lions was to return the apex predator to the area, and it's one of the most iconic species in Africa. I mean, if people think about lion, they think Africa, Simba, Lion King, and with lions coming in, there is potential that the population grows to a point where it starts filtering into the community areas, and so that's also something that one has to consider. How do we manage these lions? Are we going to cull lions? That's what people do in reserves. If the numbers get too many,
You're talking about fence reserves.
Fence reserves, yeah.
That's probably not particularly well understood because a lot of them don't publicize it.
Exactly.
But they'd have no choice but to do that because otherwise they'd lose all their game.
Exactly. So
or you'd have this population crashes.
Exactly, 100%. And so with lions in particular, you have a few options. One common option is translocation. Translocations are not easy. You've heard about the 24 Lions project. It's a massive undertaking to move lions. That's one option. Another option is contraceptives. So using contraceptives on females, but in a way that's also really interfering with the biology of the animal. Personally, I wouldn't say I'm the greatest fan of it, but some places have shown that it works. And then another one is translocation, contraceptives, culling, and along with culling in a way is hunting, but it's utilizing animals and actually having it as a value. People don't like to view animals, particularly the carnivore species, with a value, but unfortunately, I wouldn't say unfortunately, it's these animals are there to be utilized. We are in a wildlife utilization area, and it brings in a significant amount of money that can be put directly back to the anti-poaching, and that money can help conserve the area into the future.
I mean, it's incredible when you explain it like that. You're very logically, step by step. It makes complete sense. that you have to have this hands-on approach, as opposed to this stand back and let nature do its thing, which would be fine, I guess, but for one key element of everything that you just talked about there, which is that people also exist in this landscape.
Exactly.
Yeah. And is that about managing human-wildlife interactions and conflict then?
Yeah, so that comes down to, it will eventually get to that point. So currently, just to give an idea of the context of Zambezi Delta, is the line numbers are roughly at about just over 60 at the moment. We started off with 24. The population has almost tripled.
In 2 years, right?
It's about just under 3 years.
Just under 3 years. Okay.
That's just crazy.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And
that they've. I mean, obviously, there's a standard rate that lions are breeding, but they've been breeding, but you've been able to protect them.
Exactly, and so we have lost a few along the way, which in any situation, any reintroduction, it will happen. Initially, when we started, there were a few lions, males, which was quite I think a hard loss for us, because we brought in more females than males, because our idea was we need the females to reproduce, to have cubs, and it worked out that way. But we did lose a few males to things like snares and gin traps. Those are the main forms of poaching within our area, within the Zambezi Delta complex.
Maybe, I'm sure most people are familiar with the term snares, but maybe quantify what a gin trap is.
Okay, so a snare is also something that it varies. So
Okay.
a snare can be a rope, it can be, I guess, a string, it can be a wire, it can be, in Afrikaans we call it blauwdraad. It's like very, very tough wire.
Piano wire.
Yeah.
Godfather style.
But what's even worse than that here is that it's that wound cable, and that stuff it just doesn't break, and it will dig into skin. It's pretty horrendous when you see an animal with that around its neck or around its foot. So that's a snare. So it does vary, but unfortunately, yeah, we've got that cable wire, and then a gin trap. That is one nasty thing. So it's, I think in the States it's similar to a bear claw,
Like a bear trap.
trap. And the ones that they make here in Africa are from leaf springs from a vehicle, and they are fairly large in size. How would you say?
Like
size?
6 to 8 inches across. Yeah.
like a small dinner plate.
Yeah.
And some large enough to fit your whole foot inside. And if that thing comes down on your foot, it is one painful experience, and you might even lose it.
And would it break, because these are homemade gin traps? Yeah.
Yeah.
But would it break your foot as a human if you stood in it?
It probably would.
Really?
It generally breaks the feet of the antelope species, and the targets are animals like nyala, reedbuck, sable, hartebeest, and once that so basically when the animal steps on it, the trap closes onto the leg, and then that animal has to walk with this gin trap around its leg, and the animal can't go very far. And so what ends up happening is that animal will die right there, and then the poacher will come and collect his prize. And I guess the biggest thing with those is that they're just super, super unsustainable ways of harvesting. They're not based on any quotas. They harvest, it's an offtake of males, females, youngsters, mature individuals. And what they'll tend to do is they'll target a specific area. And in the past, they used to put 30, 40 snares, maybe 10, 15 gin traps in one particular area. Not even that large, just make sure that they cover the whole area. If any animal walks in there, they'll catch one at least. But with the increase in the efforts in the anti-poaching, the incidence of that occurring is minuscule. We've got helicopters doing anti-poaching patrols as well, and what we find is that these poachers they tend to stick around for a day, if that. Sometimes they do end up getting lucky and they get a day or two in the area, but soon we on their tracks, and the anti-poaching is able to make arrests and remove all the poaching activity that's within the area.
Because you said that in the past they would come in and like camp out
Yeah, exactly.
and be here for days or weeks.
Weeks, yeah. Some even months.
Really?
Yeah, because fortunately, so with the hunting concessions is they tend to close season from between December to about March, April. So for 3-4 months of the year, you can have very little activity within the concession. But having anti-poaching present during that time has a significant impact on catching the poachers and removing the poaching activity.
I was just going to say, we're going to talk to Mark about the details of the anti-poaching, but from your perspective as somebody who's invested and interested in big cats and carnivores and things like that, maybe talk a little bit about the scale and the effort that goes into the anti-poaching.
So firstly, it requires a lot of funding, which is pretty much any project that you want to do to combat an issue as wide scale as what it is. So in terms of assets, if I can put it that way, so we've got quite a few motorcycles. The motorcycles have changed the game completely for the anti-poaching. The guys used to go out on foot, the rangers used to go out on foot, and covering what Qatar 11 alone is, it's about just under 2,000 square kilometers. That's 200,000 hectares, which is what's that, around almost 500,000 acres, 4.5, yeah, somewhere around there. On foot with 3-4 teams it's a fairly impossible task.
How many years is that going to take you to try
exactly
to get around?
Exactly. So with the introduction of the motorcycles, it's allowed our anti-poaching to travel areas a lot quicker, get and respond to situations rapidly, and it's had a massive impact on reducing the impact of poaching in our area. Along with that, we've got a 22 a Robinson 22 helicopter that's been dedicated to anti-poaching, and that has also changed the game, because what the bush bikes, we call them bush bikes, the motorcycles, what they do in the forest, the helicopter does in the floodplain where it's open, and you can actually, you can see activity, you can see guys lighting fires, you can see fishermen walking there that don't have the licenses to fish there, and each technical introduction of the helicopter and introduction of the bikes just adds a level of effectiveness that just it has changed the game. And in addition to that, we've also started with a smart, it's called smart software. So what that is, it's a program that's loaded onto a mobile device. So each ranger gets a mobile device. When they go out on patrol, they're actively recording their movements. So it records GPS locations. They can see exactly where they're going. They can record, here's a gin trap, here's a snare. If they arrest a poacher, they can take down that information. And that's also a way of reporting back what the guys are doing in the field.
It's pretty sophisticated. Yeah.
It's getting there, and the technology is obviously evolving, which is suiting places like these. There are obviously, in a landscape like this, there are challenges, because in places where there's mobile network coverage, you're able to deploy certain other methods that work even better than what we have. But in a way, it's a blessing in disguise, because it means that the poachers also can't communicate with each other. So it kind of cancels that out on both sides, which is probably a good thing.
I hadn't noticed that there was no mobile network here.
We both turned our phone on airplane mode when we got here. We're like, well,
we're out.
Talk to you later. Well, Willem, as us coming in here and kind of seeing what's going on, and obviously we want to move a little bit into the cheetah stuff, but just as somebody who was given an opportunity to join this 24 Lions project, maybe just talk a little bit about what your what your hope is, what the vision is in terms of what you can accomplish here. And you know, we've gotten some statistics and that kind of thing about this being, you know, not, I don't even know if you want to say arguably, but possibly the most successful lion conservation project in recent history. I mean, talk a little bit about that and what you hope to achieve and that kind of being part of your legacy.
That sounds really cool.
But I think it is, right?
Yeah.
From my understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the expansion of the range for lions, I mean, it's phenomenal. You know what's also phenomenal is, although the story has got traction and we've seen it in some outlets, that it hasn't had more. No. It's crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think that, I mean, even you and I, who are pretty tapped into this world and this, you know, continent for sure, didn't know all the details of what this project is actually about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's quite incredible, and it's really nice to be involved in what is to date the largest introduction of lions into an area, which is the 24 lions, and it's in a way it's not about the number, and it's not about the fact that it is the greatest, but what's even better than that is bringing lions into an area where it can potentially sustain hundreds of lions, where a few years ago there were absolutely none left. And for me, that's the most exciting thing is monitoring this population into the future, making sure that they're covered in a sense that we know what they're doing, where they're moving. We're dealing with the human-wildlife conflict issues, anything that pops up that we can try and respond to. And with the prey density in this area, the numbers of lions are certainly going up. They're still only using a fraction of the ecosystem, so that's going to expand as well. And I really can't wait to see what happens next. For me personally, I'd really like to follow up with a PhD on these lions. I just think it's an incredible opportunity to further, this is not obviously personal, but further my career in conservation, and can't really think of a better project to do it at, and partners to do it with, and obviously an awesome species. I just think that it's so with a PhD, it's for me, I don't want to be called a doctor at the end of the day. That's not, it's obviously not what it's about. It's about really challenging yourself as a biologist and trying to add to science. But what for me is more than science is the management side, is to try and find out ways, how can we effectively monitor and manage the species so that it becomes a stronghold. Because what's happening in Mozambique is that there's a revival of wildlife conservation from the south to the north. The country's obviously gone through some turmoil, some really bad stuff, but they've come out a lot stronger. And there's areas that are popping up that are needing lions. And what I kind of foresee is that Zambezi Delta, the lion population within the Zambezi Delta, will become in a way a source population to feed into other areas. And that's kind of where...
That's real conservation right there.
If we get to that point, that's... What more do you want?
There's one pretty big takeaway that I just want to reiterate here, or get you to reiterate, is that we talk, particularly in Europe, about rewilding, which is doing things kind of like what you're doing here, bringing a species back to a place that it previously existed. But you did something here, and Mark and the team, and prior to you even arriving, first, and that was reestablish the foundation of the ecosystem. And I think that component is often missing in those conversations. They want to pick the sexy animal. Let's bring back wolves. Let's bring back lions. Yeah, but is the ecosystem ready to take them? Whereas here, the game numbers and the abundance was already growing exponentially before that step was taken. And I think that making sure that people understand how much work went in before that is just so important, because we all want to see the amazing charismatic apex predators, but add 20 years or whatever it takes to get to that stage. There's a lot of fast tracking that I think people want to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think in our context, the kind of conservation hero is actually Mark Haldane, because he was the one who identified the area. He found out that, or he came and looked at the area and said, this is an absolutely incredible area, unlike any other place he's been at before. The game is not there, but let's start an anti-poaching team with the money that we get from the hunters. And with that, it started, I want to say a career path, but it's a lifestyle that he's now kind of had to follow. And it's been an absolutely incredible journey, because by bringing in the anti-poaching, he's just been able to provide the protection that this ecosystem needs. And obviously I can't say that I've witnessed the recovery, but even within the few years I've been here, you can see how the wildlife has recovered. And it's the people that identified the area, found this place and said this is a place that needs protection. It can eventually have an apex predator, but what you need to do is make sure that you protect it first. With the protection, the wildlife will increase. As the wildlife increases, you can start to think about the apex predators, bringing in lions and all other kinds of carnivore species.
Tyler and I have asked all the biologists and people involved in conservation this question in the interviews over the last week. Is that clearly you're someone who's impassioned by nature, and particularly big cats. That's what you live and breathe every day here. And yet you're clearly someone, just from the few takeaways of conversation here, who supports the hunting of them. How on earth do you match that up? I mean, you spend so much time looking at data points, and you know these animals. You know that this animal lost its cub because a male lion came in. Not that this has happened here yet, because there hasn't been any huntings of lions, but leopards are hunted here. How do you make peace with that?
So, one piece of advice that someone once told me was, it's not about the individual, it's about the species. And I think that's where the line is drawn for me, is if you think about each individual animal and you think Cecil the lion, some bad hunter, some dentist from the States came and shot this collared lion. It was obviously not the greatest situation, but at the end of the day, it's not about the individual animal, it's about the species. And for example, you can lose a lion to a collaring event if you have incorrect dosage, or you dart on a very hot day and the lion doesn't wake up. You've technically killed the lion, and it's through a management tool. And again, I just come back to the fact that if you're trying to manage an individual, you are not really doing conservation. You need to manage the species. And so by doing that, you need to manage the population. And so one form of management, which we've discussed a little bit earlier, is trophy hunting. And unfortunately, there's just such backlash on trophy hunting at the moment. And one can understand why, because it's not a pretty form of conservation. And people sitting at home, I want to say the armchair conservationists, and a lot of people fall into that category, and they can easily make decisions and put bans in place that, say for example, banning leopard hunting in southern Africa, or in Botswana and Namibia, or wherever, in various countries. What impact that has, what the kind of indirect impacts that has, direct and indirect, can be significant. And there's quite a few people that have popped up recently that have been not necessarily advocates for trophy hunting, but they understand that it works. And what it provides is it provides protection in an area where no one wants to be. It's areas that are infested with tsetse flies. No tourists, no 5-star lodge wants to be in an area where there's tsetse flies. There's mosquitoes. There's tons and tons of mosquitoes that will give you malaria. A lot of people will die. It's difficult areas. It's not always, road networks are usually quite, it's hard terrain. It's wet areas like we have here. But those people don't see that. And one other aspect that they don't see is the community side. And so with the trophy hunting, what we've managed to achieve here is to build up a great relationship with the community based in the area, and that's engaging with them on a regular basis, and that's through the hunters' dollars that's coming in. We've started a beekeeping project for the community. There's meat that gets distributed to them that's been hunted from the area, and significant amounts. We're talking on average about 66,000 tons of meat every year that gets distributed to the communities. And we've provided an agricultural field for them. So what apologies, I'm diverting a little bit into the community side.
Do it, Willem.
So
this is important because we spend a lot of time talking about the anti-poaching, but with all the will in the world and all the anti-poaching that you can facilitate, if you don't have local community buy-in, you'll forever be fighting that war.
Exactly. So that's why I think what has been achieved here, for example, is just it's kind of like a model that should be applied to other areas, because a lot of areas don't have that. And just to kind of to add on to what I was saying earlier is, so there's the beekeeping project which fully involves the community. There's the agricultural field. There's fishing licenses that are handed out to guys to come and fish at certain times, fairly restricted, but it provides them access, and it provides us with knowledge of who's going out when, and if we find someone that doesn't have a license, we can take them out of the concession. We've got the meat coming in, so there's various different projects that are fully trying to benefit the communities and benefit their families. And you can ask any one of these community members what they think about the hunting area, what they think about, the benefits that they get. They're all smiling. And
hopefully tomorrow we're going to do that.
Yeah.
With a translator.
Yeah, you'll probably need a translator.
I can speak a little bit of Spanish, so get skate by with Portuguese.
Yeah, you'll probably be fine.
Yo quiero una más cerveza, por favor.
Beer. How's your beer?
Oh, close enough.
Are you still going good?
Mine's empty.
Empty, Tyler. Furnish that man with the beer.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So we've talked a lot about the lions now, but now you're going to have to split your time, because you now have bomas full of cheetah sitting right beside where we're doing this podcast.
I'm already growing some grey hairs.
You must be, knowing what happened, having a couple of years of the Lion Project under your belt now, with this stretching ahead of you, you must be so excited to see what's going to happen here. But maybe anxious as well?
Yep. As I said, I'm probably going to develop a few more grey hairs in a few weeks' time. With the cheetahs, we've identified that cheetahs have occurred here in the past, and that is the most important aspect when reintroducing a species. So we had a kind fellow called Vincent van der Merwe. He is from the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and he manages a cheetah meta-population project, which is based in South Africa, but they try and manage a cheetah population within relatively small areas. I was kind of being an exception. They try and manage the cheetahs so that there's gene flow between all these different reserves, because what's happened in South Africa, for example, you've got quite a number of small fenced game reserves, and they're able to sustain a certain number of cheetahs, but they can't sustain a sustainable population, or they can't maintain a sustainable population. And so what the meta population does is it allows all those small reserves to act as one large population, if that makes sense.
With the help of humans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't, you wouldn't be able to, you have to have that. There's no way of trying to work around it. So I've always been, kind of a fan in a way, of advocate of that method, because in a place like South Africa it works. In a place like Namibia, where you've got large open areas that kind of links to Botswana, it's a different scenario. But in the context where you've got small areas, it works. And so, when was this? This was last year. End of last year. 2 years ago, 2019. He popped in here. I think he was cruising through the area and managed to land up here. And he actually came and he thought this is an excellent place to reintroduce cheetah. And we got chatting, and we've always, Mark Haldane has always been, he's kind of been keen on the idea, but where do you source cheetah from? It's not something that just pops up.
I know a guy down the road.
Yeah. And so anyways, the conversation started and the discussion started, and those evolved, and there was a feasibility assessment that was done, and within that there was quite a substantial moment, and that was when we found a historical book from 1914, a book by the name of an author by the name of Reginald Morgan, and Reginald, and he was based in Kilimon, which is roughly about an hour's flight northeast of us, if I've got my bearings correct. And he was based there. He was a Brit, and he recorded a whole bunch of stuff that we thought would never have been recorded. And one of those was a cheetah occurred, what they call south of the Shipunga forest, which is, it says the plains of south of the Shipunga forest, which is right here in our floodplain. And so we actually never knew that cheetahs occurred here. So even though we wanted to reintroduce these cheetah, we actually had to go back and find, well, did they actually occur here? Can we actually reintroduce them? Because it's kind of an important factor, because if they didn't occur here, you kind of maybe bringing in animals that never occurred here, and that's got various implications. And so we found this document. It was a great book, and that gave us the motivation to go ahead, and I guess the validation to go ahead. And what's followed up with that is we've got a Boma 6 compartments with 11 cheetahs, which is just a few years later.
Who are about 25 yards behind us, hoping for some snacks. And that, maybe talk a little bit about that. We've mentioned them looking hungry, but tell us about why you have them in a fenced-in area, that we call a boma, and what that process is like for caretaking and prepping them and getting them ready for release.
Yeah, so when reintroducing a carnivore species, you've got two ways of releasing it. Two main ways. One is a hard release, so hard or hot release. And what that is you translocate the animal. The animal comes from one area, it gets flown or driven to another area, and you just open up the gates, and or if it's in a crate, and you just say, "Yep, good luck, cheers." What happens then is those animals, they're not acclimatized to the area. They don't know where they are. They've just had a lot of stress traveling the whole route. Whether with cheetahs you don't sedate them, you put them in a crate. With lions and leopards you'll probably sedate them, or you will sedate them.
Don't want to be in the back of the plane without.
Yeah.
I saw that leopard last night.
Yeah.
Being anywhere near even a mildly sedated leopard, we can talk about that afterwards.
Yeah, we definitely can. And so, so you bring them in, you hot release them or hard release them. The animal is totally confused, and what happens then is you have major exploratory movements most of the time. Animals moving great distances trying to figure out where the hell am I. and that can often lead to them walking into areas that they shouldn't. And so the boma period, we call these enclosures bomas, and what they are, it's kind of an acclimation period. So they must acclimatize to the area, get used to vehicles if they are quite wild animals, and it kind of provides that acclimation. So that's why we put them in the enclosures, is to prevent them from just moving off. We want them to acclimatize, get them used to the area. Once we open up the gate after, let's call it 4 weeks, which is kind of roughly what the guidelines are, and it depends on what your objectives are. Once you release that, they will usually stay around the boma for a few days. You usually give them one feed outside, a carcass, just so that they stick around for a bit, and after that they'll slowly start dispersing into the ecosystem, start meeting up with other animals, start making their own kills, because obviously they've been fed for a few weeks. But all of these animals that are in the bomas, they're all wild animals. They know how to hunt. It doesn't affect their hunting ability at all. So, yeah.
And they're all collared. And so I imagine you're already getting all this data, but they're all sitting clustered together right now.
So with the collars, why we put collars on while they're still in the boma is it prevents us from having to dart every single one
again.
And because with darting animals, there's always a risk that things can go wrong, and so to do it unnecessarily is not fair on the animals. So the collars are set on one GPS location a day, so it saves battery life. And
how long will they last at that?
So the collars of the various animals, it depends on the animal.
Because you can put a bigger battery pack on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what the GPS collars have is it's a GPS unit, satellite unit, which sits right on top, and at the bottom is the battery. It kind of provides the weight so that the GPS unit stays facing up.
So it's just countered.
Exactly.
Okay.
But obviously you need the batteries.
Yeah.
So with elephants, for example, you've got a counterweight right at the bottom. The whole unit sits on top of the elephant, and the counterweight is at the bottom, but it's got no batteries. The batteries are all sitting on top, just because it's large enough to have that. But with a carnivore, with a cheetah, for example, they're very slight animals. They weigh roughly between 35 and 50 kilograms, kind of on average, give or take. And so they're not large animals. And with a collar, you want the collar to weigh not more than 2% of the body weight of the animal.
Because otherwise you might impede their ability to hunt.
Exactly.
And I would guess there has been studies in the past to see whether the collars of that weight do affect them.
Yeah. And so generally you won't find that it affects them much.
Okay.
But you do need the research to show that. But there's been tons of animals collared, and it's not really at the point where it's detrimental to the animal.
Now.
Yeah. And what the collars have also developed over time, and the ones that we've chosen is it fits really well around the animal's neck. So there's very little rotation of the collar around the neck. They're also camouflaged, so I mean you often have to look 2-3 times just to see whether the animal's got a collar or not. And you have the collar that it's not too loose, not too tight. As the animal grows, you don't want the animal to have a tight collar, because that can obviously lead to complications. But you fit the collar so that it fits perfectly around the neck.
What are you expecting to see in a couple of weeks' time once these cheetah go out?
So with the release, we'll probably plan it so that it's about a 4-week boma period. And with that, it's opening the gates. As I said, you will provide a carcass.
The wind has changed.
Yeah, that's fine.
You can just lean back, because I'll just turn our mics off.
Okay.
When in the podcast, it's fine.
So with the release, we will pretty much open the gates. The cheetahs, as you've seen, they're quite relaxed. You can approach them on foot. They're not too concerned with people, which is great. And that allows us, in future as well, to, if we need to dart them, then they're not scared of us. Which is great, because here the grass does get quite tall, and to be able to do that, it becomes a bit of a challenge, particularly in the wet season. In the dry season, we've got the grass is a lot shorter, so it becomes a lot easier. But with the release, we'll expect the cheetahs to remain within the area for a few days. We witnessed this with the lions. It was roughly around a week or 2 weeks that they stuck around. And again, that just allows them to not to bolt off after you've opened up the gate. So the most important thing is that they are just used to the area, that they move gently as opposed to rapidly and trying to bugger off, I guess. And so in the bigger picture, we've based on prey densities and preferred prey species of what the cheetah might feed on, what has been seen in other places. The carrying capacity that this area could sustain is roughly around 120, 130 maybe. I'm always quite cautious to apply carrying capacity values to carnivores, because that those models, they exclude the anthropogenic effects, so snares and people and all that kind of stuff. It excludes lions coming in and causing disruption and killing off a few individuals. So you've got all these factors that you have to consider, natural and human-induced factors that can impact the success of the project, or of this cheetah project.
It's fascinating, and I'm so excited, having had the opportunity to spend some time here and learn from the people on the ground, to follow this project now forward. Both 24 Lions and the Cheetah Project, which we've actually seen from day one of having their paws on the dirt here. So in a tiny way, I feel a little bit invested.
Oh no, we're definitely invested.
I feel like I am invested in the success of this now, because I've seen how much work goes in with my own eyes. So you're going to have to make sure that you keep us up to date.
That's no problem.
One last question for me, Willem, is you have a long career ahead of you. What do you see as the future for conservation in Africa and the challenges that it faces? Because it's a difficult landscape. To achieve the kind of success that has been achieved here is not common.
Yeah, that's, I guess, a discussion that probably doesn't have one answer. It's conservation is such a broad and diverse topic. I mean, there's so many different aspects that one has to consider, and it's so difficult. I mean, within each country, you've got various different organizations trying to achieve similar things, but they've got different objectives. So you've got the institutions and the NGOs kind of not necessarily agreeing on things, and that also makes things challenging. But in terms of the bigger scheme of things, I've got hope for Africa. I think there's a lot of good coming out of countries like Mozambique. There's a lot of challenges. I think the major ones from the wildlife side are bushmeat poaching, community encroachment into areas, human-wildlife conflict, which associates with that. And I think probably the most important thing is trying to prioritize areas that are viable for wildlife conservation in future, because I think one of the most wasteful things is trying to conserve small areas that have got zero impact on conservation, and so using that funding in areas that actually can contribute on a larger scale. And it comes to there's a concept that we were taught in university called conservation triage, and it's pretty much identifying areas that are required for that should be prioritized, in rank order of what should be conserved. What is the main priority. So areas like these where you've got just over 2 million acres, and unfortunately with these large areas you have those major impacts of bushmeat poaching, the community encroachment. And so I think in terms of the hunting areas, I would say the most important thing is establishing anti-poaching that is effective and that are able to patrol the area effectively, that they can remove the poaching threats, remove the poachers from the areas, and trying to sustain wildlife within those areas will come along with that. So the most important thing is to protect it, and the wildlife will increase from that. It's not an easy answer.
Are you gonna? This is where you're not necessarily exactly here, but I can't imagine. And we haven't even talked about the leopard yet. We're going to have to touch on that very briefly. But I can't imagine, given the kind of work that you've been involved in, that you're ever going to want to leave this place. I mean, where do you go from here? Where do you go from here? I don't really know how you raise the bar in terms of. For most people in a career, it's like you're always going to the next thing that's a little bit more exciting, that's supposed to be the better and build on. And obviously, you're continually building a knowledge base and understanding, but I'm not entirely sure if you can really top the kind of level of excitement of the stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis now.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, you're pretty much, flying helicopters all day and messing around with lions and putting collars on animals. It's just an incredible project to be involved in, and fortunate to be in a team that is just so passionate about the same things. Trying to conserve the landscape, trying to conserve the species, better understand them. And I think with a great team, a great place, awesome project, awesome donors, it is pretty much a dream job. And I don't think there's really much out there at the moment that could top this.
I've got a great idea for all the people who are thinking about. Hang on, let's hear about this crazy leopard story. We're going to do that in another podcast with a different person who is also there. So now you're just going to have to tune into another episode. But there is one thing that I just want to wrap up with, is there'll be a lot of people, and I get these emails fairly frequently when I have. Well, all my guests are amazing on the podcast, and they tend to do really cool things like this. And I think that a lot of people feel like that's another world. It's kind of completely out with the reach of anything that they could possibly ever do. But speaking particularly to younger people who still have the opportunity to study something at university and to pursue this kind of stuff, what would you say to them about channeling a life that fulfills this kind of existence? Because it is possible. A lot of this stuff seems completely impossible. You've done it. Did you think you'd be able to do something like this when you were leaving high school and thinking about studying at university?
I guess it was probably always a dream, but never really within the reality realm. I think the most important bit of advice that I would give is work experience and qualifications. I think what's kind of in the conservation world a bit of a negative thing at the moment is just trying to have as many qualifications as you can, but not actually having the field experience, not having worked with organizations and the bigger names that really give credibility to people's careers, and so for the younger people out there that are interested in going down the conservation route, there's so many options, and I think it's important to identify what your passion is and what you're good at. And so, for example, if you are interested if you really enjoy reptiles and you think that's your thing, and you're very good at collecting them, why not pursue a career in that? Don't think that, okay, this person is doing something on elephants, that's also cool, but I should rather do that because that's what everyone else is doing. Do what you enjoy doing, because that's where you'll get the most joy out of it, and where you'll probably have a longer future in, a longer career in. And so for me personally, I identified the fact that I really enjoyed carnivore conservation. I like the cats, and it's something that I'll never ever get bored of. And knowing that, and being able to work in various countries, Malawi and Namibia and now Mozambique as well, it really is, I think, important to identify what you want to do, what are your goals, what are your ambitions. And I think it's difficult for youngsters, because youngsters tend to, when you're fresh out of varsity, or whether you're deciding what you want to do to study, you kind of not really sure. You've got absolutely no idea. But that's where the work experience comes in. If you start volunteering in places, if you start, just putting your CV out there and showing that you're interested, you're keen, then things will happen. And sometimes it's a bit of a slow process, but I always trust the process. I think that if you haven't got the ticket, you can't win. So if you've got the ticket, you stand a chance to be involved with some incredible projects. And I think what goes along with that is just having a personality and the right attitude towards it.
Don't be an asshole.
Pretty much.
That's a good rule.
Pretty much, because that's...
I mean, it's a really important point. I was actually speaking to the other filmmakers here the other day, and we were talking about like people we like to work with, and just being good with people, and just generally being a nice person, and being willing to like listen and learn from other people is such a huge part, because then it's amazing. You get the invites. Yeah, come and spend a couple of months here and learn from these people.
Exactly.
And you might have to, there might be a sacrifice in that. They might just feed you for the couple of months.
Yeah.
That's your payment, and you're going to graft and you're going to not sleep. But I mean, one day when you're dying in your bed, you'll have stories. You're going to have a lot.
Yeah.
Including a lot of leopard stories and lion stories and cheetah stories. And
Well, I know we're closing this up here, but one of the things I just wanted to briefly ask you is obviously that this place, this project, 24 Lions, and now the cheetah was obviously, if not entirely funded, mostly funded through the Cabela Family Foundation and hunting dollars. And I think we had the chance to talk to Dan about his vision for their foundation and what they hope to do. And his answer to that, to put it simply, is that he's hoping to be a catalyst and to show that, basically to try to inspire other organizations to participate in the same way, whether they're hunting related or not. And I think that when you talk about there's hope for Africa, I mean, we all cling to that in a sense. And maybe in that same vein of advice to future conservationists or biologists who maybe read something online or see thing in news, what does that look like to you for the ability for a hunting-based nonprofit organization or an NGO or traditional conservation groups to work together and pool those resources to do something greater?
It's a really good question, because I think what tends to happen is that there is a split, and there's money in both realms, if I can call it that way. There's money in the hunting industry realm, and there's also in the NGO realm. And I think, again, I guess it comes down to attitudes and having objectives that are in line with conservation, as opposed to kind of individualistic views. Because I think with the NGO side is that there's often an anti-hunting position that's held, or perspective that's held, and from the hunting side there's often we just get negative feedback all the time, so let's not associate with them. But there's certainly a niche or there is an ability for those two worlds to merge, and I think with the right partners in place, partners that can facilitate that. So, for example, in Ivan Carter Wildlife Conservation Alliance organization, that is one that bridges that gap. So, for example, we've had people coming here that are actually non-hunters, but they participate in the conservation because they see the landscape. They aren't necessarily anti-hunting. They're not necessarily for hunting, but they understand why it's done. And I think it comes down to having conversation with people and explaining what is actually going down, because it's easy to look at an area and say, oh, let's call it anti-hunters, to look at an area and say, the hunter, why would I ever be involved? But if you explain the history of this area, there's no ways that you can look at it and say anti-hunters are causing destruction and havoc all over Africa. This is a model that has shown how, with the right methods in place, with the trophy hunting, wildlife has, unlike any other place, has recovered. And I think it comes down to having conversation with people and explaining that. And that's often, I think, missed. It often comes down to the argument initially, and then nothing happens from there. But it should start from a story, and the story should be exactly what's happened on the ground, and explaining to people, having those people come out and see the area, see that it's not an easy area you can't just set up an ecotourism lodge here with 5-star meals and all that. It's just, it cannot sustain that. It cannot support that. And once people know the story and they come out to see the area, I think that's when their minds start to change, when they see the wildlife in these areas coming back, when they see how the communities benefit from the hunters coming in, the meat going towards them, to them, funding coming in to fund the agricultural field, and so obviously it's not one simple solution, but I think it comes down to both effort, but both sides doing effort to try and bridge that gap.
And on that advice, an optimistic note, Willem, thank you very much. Under the moonlight in Mozambique, we will bring this podcast to a close and go and have dinner.
Great.
Unlike the cheetahs, we're going to have to wait till tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's fine. They'll be all right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Cheers.